scientific methodology to understand spiritual thought or ghosts or things like that. Usually the people who can't define a ghost or a spirit or a spiritual wave that comes over somebody or a vision that somebody has, they can only surmise what they think that's doing. They cannot delve the depths. And so they're still always left with some unanswered questions. And there's two general tendencies in this whole speculation of mystics. To regard God or deity as outside the soul, which rises to its God by successive ages, or to regard God as within the soul and to be found by delving deeper into one's own reality. So this whole idea of transcendence, that moving this plane to this place, to that place, the place of sleeping or partial slumber, being awake, that whole idea of that is held most mystics. It's the current ancient mystical system. There's Neo and of Gnosticism. We've all heard of Gnosticism. Gnosis being knowledge. I say, when it comes to religion, I am agnostic. Gnosis. I don't really know. I have knowledge, is what I say, which would be the opposite of that. And of certain things. That's when I say I'm a Gnostic. I'm not an atheist, nor am I a believer. I'm kind of fallen in that gray area. I've understood a few things. It doesn't mean that you can't have full understanding of all the mysteries of this thing and grasping the mysteries and feel that awakening, as it were, over here. You can't know all things, but when I think you really start to gain this understanding, this weakness, this missed level, is when you see that all these things are connected, like seeing a tree above ground or planting that all have roots, start going underground and looking at the roots and understanding the roots, and find how the root systems lock down deep. That's this is what is kind of going on. Looking down beneath the surface, trying to figure things out on that level, on a deeper level. So, this whole idea is that the connection between God and humans, by epic making, in the philosophy of contemplation, it's among those who think God or the supreme reality as being within the soul, like Quakers do, and of Vedanta. So this is all this kind of this oneness. Those people who try to make it incredibly large, bringing it internal, making that philosophy internal. And so the language of mysticism all by itself is always difficult and seems to be always highly symbolic. It's readily seen in the Song of Solomon. It's known as songs, but the Song of Solomon in the Old Testament, the book of Revelation. It's in the New Testament, and in the writings of William Blake, mystics, especially the Roman Catholic sort, and the Islamians have made use of terminology that's borrowed ordinary human. A conventional analysis kind of goes like this: the soul undergoes this purification, this purgatory way of eradicating things it needs to get rid of, which leads to feeling of God or deity, of nature, of the universe, of people around you. It's kind of this illuminative phase. And after a period, that soul may be said to enter mystical union with deity, with the unity of doing, which begins with the consciousness that God is present to the soul. It's eternal. the soul progresses through a time, and this whole ecstatic state to the final perfect state of union with God, which is spiritual ecstatic. It's that, remember the ecstatics, they used to express their faith, their religion, their spirituality by going into trances, these senses that were wild and physically manifest. And so I'm not necessarily always talking about that. It's by going inside and letting it express itself. It's that perfect state. And late in this whole process, there's an experience, the dark night of the soul, people have called. Now, we could do a whole show talking about the dark night of the soul. When I say that phrase, your imagination and think, I think many of you know what the dark night of the soul is about. But many of you may understand it from the realm of attaining deeper wisdom. We've all been through the dark night of the soul, but not by definition as mysticism. I could say, I've been through the dark night of the soul. Somebody would say, oh, I've had very times in my life. I've had loss. I've had hurt. I've had all these things I've come through. And yes, there's a certain form of love there that is brought on the darkness. But the dark night of the soul, this is the conditive person feels completely deserted by God, by everything they may have ever put their faith in, by hope, and even by any sort of power to pray or to express or to seek answers. And it lasts sometimes for years, these dark nights of the soul. And if you're in the midst of that, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you've been there, what I'm talking about. So visions, voices, ecstasies, these are all things that might accompany any or none of the states of contemplation before you finally unify yourself with that greater understanding. And it's because of these external, non-essential manifestations that the erroneous idea has arisen that all enthusiastic and non-intellectual religious movements are necessarily mystical. They're not. The positive convictions of the mystic arise from the fact that they're based on what he or she must regard as objective reality directly perceived. Get that? Objective reality directly perceived. In other words, to down to the most common vernacular, this is the idea of experience, the things that you have experienced, that objective what's the word I used? Evidence formulates the positive convictions of the mystic. I say to people, I get online and I have lots of debates with people, or people who want to debate with me. Sometimes and I have people that'll put things in Facebook thread, my other social media. Well, Scotty Roberts, what do you think about this thing? They've got me, and care about that. I don't care if they think they've got me, but I will give them an answer. Not precisely the thing and this and that and so on, or look about that some more. This whole objectivity that messes with your life helps create these positive convictions that bring you to a place where you know what the hell you're talking about, where you know what the hell you believe, you know what you've perceived, and you know where you're going with it. So there's so much information about this whole stuff of mysticism that we could get into, and I've really only got about a minute left of this segment. We might tap into it again after the top of the hour. But what I want to tell you right now is that you're listening to the Intrepid Radio program. And I'm just checking my time. I've got 1 minute and 20 seconds left before the break. So let's use that wisely. You're listening to my show. And as you know from last night, if you're new tonight and say, I haven't seen this show before, it's because we're brand spanking new. It's a resurrection of an old Intrepid radio program that we used to do a few years ago. And we're starting it up again tonight as kind of tail spinning off of my live stream that I've been doing for quite a number of months this year. And so you're here now listening to it on Odyssey Radio Network. And Odyssey Radio Network is someplace you can go to odysseyradio.com. Odyssey is spelled a little differently. It's spelled I-S-Y. And you can get there, look at their web, check out the schedule, what's playing live. For now, I'm going to ask you to sit where you are. Don't go away, because I got to go out to break, and we're going to be back in just a couple of minutes. So sit tight, hang tight, wait for me. I'll be back.
There's an old town road with tree of Chinese and a magic which gave a life to the works.
Folks, we're going to go for my 25-minute segment. We're going to sit now, and we're got about 2 minutes to blow. And see you all early over in the chat. I can check in, but enjoying the show tonight. And let's see, I've got started at looking at I'm trying to make sure I don't screw up my timing at all. So I got to have 2 solid minutes at the bottom, and then we can right back in. So I'm going to set my time very soon. I think we've been going about 30 since the break started, because I didn't look right away at the clock. So think folks about this whole thing about mysticism. Go ahead and throw it up into the room. If you've got some ideas, I want to see them. We may or may not be able to address it. And do so well. Talk amongst yourselves. Let people know what's going. Let them know what you're thinking. And if we can, we'll let them listen. So, Rocky Uchi and I are on live in about at 11 o'clock, and you can stay there. Now we've got a great guest today. If you don't know Matt Locke, you don't know nobody. Seriously, Matt Locke from the Matt Locke Show. Rocky's co-host with him on the Conservative one with the Blaze. And you can listen to us tonight in about an hour and a half. And a very good show. Matt Locke, always fun, always entertaining, always knows his stuff. Take my phone right now, by the way. I'm going to reset this. Siri, set my timer 28.5 minutes from now. Set my timer for 28 and a half minutes from now. Doesn't want to do it. One more time before we go back. Hey. Set a timer for 28 minutes. Timer for 28 minutes. What the hell? Set a timer for 28. Technology really sucks sometimes. Alright. I'm going to have to do this manually. So now that we're running, I'd say almost a minute later than I wanted to be. Let's see, if I take that, and I got to look at what time, I've got to cut out exactly. Okay, here we go, folks. All right, welcome back to the Intrepid Radio program. I want to thank you all for being here. This is segment 2 tonight, and we're right here on the Odyssey Radio Network and simulcast in video on my live stream over at YouTube, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And I'm messing with my timer. It says it's running. So I have no idea what it's doing. Oh. Technology sometimes really... I like to set a timer because I'm not looking at the clock. So sometimes nice to get it's nice to get a good handle on what doing, when you're supposed to stop talking, and when it's doing its thing. There, it's ticking off. All right, it says 27 minutes and 12 seconds left of this segment. How about that? That means we just started. So let's jump back into this just a little bit. Talking about mysticism. And with mysticism, I want to bring for you thing. Remember I said at the beginning of the show, I said I wanted to talk about things that some of my old listeners recognize, and some of you who are new to the program might not recognize. I've done interviews on this topic sometimes I could almost recite it, which I probably will almost as I'm talking about it. But my first book, Page Books, was entitled The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. And to me, there is a mystical element involved in understanding some deeper things about things that were written in ancient scriptures. The book I wrote, The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. See my lights all reflecting in it. There it is. And it's backwards on my screen. Hard to tell. So that's the book. And the Nephilim, everybody's got some different ideas about the Nephilim, things about all stuff that's behind the Nephilim, underneath it. And I think that there is, in understanding some of the mysteries, there is a deeper meaning. If you remember the other night, I talked about, was it last night? No, I might be thinking of a different show, but where I talked about some of the things, yes, about Christianity, about understanding some of the deeper things about it. Now, you can go all the way to one degree and believe Christianity is all false. You can go of the end of the spectrum, believe it's all true. The same with Judaism. The same Islam. The same with any religion out there. What you've got to do is dig deeper and try to have... If you're one of those, I don't mean this sounds so negative as it is descriptive. If you're one of churchgoers who likes to go on Sunday morning, or on Easter and Christmas or some of the holidays, but you kind of miss because there's better things to church grown old, it's boring, or it doesn't mean anything to you anymore. Perhaps to dig deeper, trying to find out what's underneath. Maybe your city is built and is maintained because you do the exercise, you the work. It's like me. When I pat on my body, can't rely on somebody else to take that fat off. Oh, there's all kinds of pills and remedies and fat burning things, but you know that really works until you actually do the work. You either have to stop eating the same way and change your lifestyle, or to apply exercise. You've got to work, muscular work that will burn off extra fat. Same thing with your system of belief, your spirituality. It's not going to work if it's grown fat and fit for you. That's not being woke. It's almost to me as if I get my physical shape sometimes. Open heart surgery and the hip surgery all over the last 2 years. I look at the day I put on weight because I couldn't do physical things. But I also look at my spine. It's almost hand in hand with my physical life. The amount of attention and concern, or the amount of fear of stepping into exercising, the fear of taking the step for fear of the pain that goes on. That, if you apply that same kind of thinking to your spirituality, you see that maybe you're injured somewhere along the way. I remember when I was in Scotty, I had a man of the Christian faith. He was a guy named Jim Elliot. And Jim Elliot, if you haven't heard this story back in the mid-57. He, Nate Saint, and some other missionaries, there were 5 missionaries down in Ecuador that were Auca Indians. And they did their plane on being dropped for a week in a row, and they ended up being killed by the Auca Indians. Jim Elliott's wife went back in there with her children and made contact and brought some of them to her faith. Now, when I was a person in the religion, I held as a hero of the faith. I read some of his books, or all his journals, is what it was. And I held him pretty high esteem back then. And when I mentioned wounding, all of this rushed in, because he had a statement he wrote in his journal where he said, God will never use someone greatly until he has allowed him to be wounded deeply. And let that sink in for a second. Now, you don't have to bring that to the Christian faith to understand it. I'm trying to be a bit ecumenical here, because I don't adhere to all the precepts of the Christian faith anymore. I have some problems with some of that. I'm certainly not a Muslim, and I'm not Jewish. And I'm not Hindu, I'm not Shinto. I'm not any other thing. I might be more pagan than anything else. I called myself once a pagan Christian, or a Christian pagan. So all of these things exist out there, but consider this. The deity, the universe, cannot use you greatly until you've been wounded deeply. And that wounding can be that dark night of the soul, that thing that takes you outside yourself to see what's happening outside yourself, to help form when you bring it back in finally and you reach that place where you can touch it again. It brings you to that place of personal conviction, that place of perhaps even awakeness, that gaining that deep understanding. And so that's what I think of when I think of all the things that we have to go through first to understand certain things. And with this particular issue on the rise and the fall of the Nephilim, I looked into that. When I started looking into that, I was in seminary way back in those days, and I used to ask the question. There's a verse in Genesis 6 that says, "And the sons of God came down and intermingled with the daughters of men and had children by them." And I would ask the question, I said, who are these sons of God? Now, we weren't just elementary kids starting to learn these things and reading them. We were adults, and we were in school to learn systematic theology, how words were structured, how the Bible texts were structured. We wanted to understand these things, so we were studying them. And one thing that I was taught very early on was that words mean something. There's a meaning to what's being written in those texts, and you have to understand a few things first. What language was it written in? What is the understanding of English translated words back in the time that language was used? To whom was the text being written? And what would their understanding of what was being written in ancient times mean to them? And so all of those, and sometimes, by the way, that's different than the way we might understand something now. So when you dig out and you research, you have to take the time. If you want to claim you believe something and you live your life by that, and you have convictions about that thing, if you want to take that thing and say, this is who I am, this is the identifier of my life on a religious level or a spiritual level, then you better damn well know what it is you believe in. Sometimes, yes, there are simple principles like thou shalt not kill. There's a simple principle. Doesn't take a lot of parsing the verbs and parsing the nouns in that sentence in the original language to understand that it means don't kill people. Don't commit murder. Now, that's an overt precept. It's just saying, here it is. There's not a lot of digging. But what do you do when it asks you questions about getting deep into your faith? when it asks you to act certain ways in society? What do you do with your personal faith? Is it something that withstands the test of crisis? Is it something that withstands the test of ridicule? And of course, I'm using overt examples here. It might not be that profound. It might just be, for me, some of it was seeing that God just did not seem to manifest the way I was told he was supposed to manifest. And it drew me away from that religion. I had problems with the religion itself being elevated, its own precepts being elevated, its own liturgy being elevated above the actual teachings of the book we were supposed to be learning by. And so it gave me pause and problems, and I withdrew from it. So you have to ask yourself, what do you believe about certain things? How deep are you willing to go to understand something? And so when I wrote this particular book on the Nephilim, I wanted to dig into that passage. I wanted to ask, why do these words say this? And I asked that question in seminary. Why does it say in the Hebrew language, why does it say in this passage, the sons of God came down and intermingled with the daughters of men? What does that mean when you break it down? The sons of God in the Hebrew, the B'nai Ha-Elohim. Elohim, what is that? Isn't Elohim one of the names of God? And sure enough, almost 3,000 times in the Old Testament, the name for God was Elohim, amongst others. El Shaddai, El Elyon, Adonai, all these different names for God, the angel of the Lord, the Lord himself, things like that were all names for God. Jehovah was another name for God. And all translated similarly or differently into English. And it said the sons of God, the B'nai Ha Elohim, the sons of the Elohim. Then you look at that name for God, Elohim. What does that break down to? The name for God was El, E-L in the English. What does that mean? El is the singular God, the God of multiple powers and majesty. Elohim, the name used for God, many, 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 many times in the Old Testament, starting with the Genesis story, the Garden of Eden story, and so on. Elohim meant God of or among many gods. The him at the end, like you see just in the word Nephilim, it's the same structure in Hebrew. Nephilim, you see, you can only see this if you're looking at the video. I'm just showing a picture of the cover of the book. Nephilim, it ends with a him sound. It's a Hebrew word. Him is a plural suffix tacked on the end of a word to denote plurality. So the name for God, used almost 3,000 times in the Old Testament, Elohim, is a plural word. Now, some wisecrack came up and said to me, well, that's obviously just the Trinity. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. And I said, well, that's interesting because the ancient Hebrews didn't have a trinity. I said they didn't recognize a trinity. Well, God in his immense wisdom gave them that word, predestined that word. And I said, that's an excuse I get really tired of really quick, is that God did certain things certain ways, so people didn't understand them, so future people would. Well, what about the people for whom it was written? So there was no Trinity. Elohim simply denotes plurality. And then all you have to do is go over to cross-reference this with Psalm 82. If you look up Psalm 82 in your Bible, you will see where God is standing in the midst of what it calls, and sometimes in English it mentions them as the divine council. And I don't know where they got those words in the English, because in the Hebrew it says this. It says, and Elohim stood in the midst of the Elohim. And he, singular, said to them, plural, you are all Elohim, the bright shining princes of heaven. But then he goes to pass judgment on them for something that they had done. And what you start getting, I remember when I was first reading these things, how could you have a singular Elohim speaking to a plurality of Elohim, calling them a plurality of Elohim, while standing before them in the singular form? Yet they were all different beings. And so an Elohim simply means God of many gods. God amongst many gods, of many gods. And so I believed, I started getting the idea, and I think this is a deeper understanding of the passage, is that God is part of a Godhead, part of a pantheon of gods. And like, if you look at the pictures of like Zeus over the Olympians in those mythologies, Zeus was a god just like everybody else was a god on Olympus. But he was kind of the chief of them. He was the one in charge. But you always had guys like Hades, maybe, trying to overthrow him, or am I just thinking of the Disney cartoon, Hercules? Can't remember. Oh, who put out my hair? Remember that guy? Voiced by James Woods. Great character in Disney mythology. So, is that what God is in the Old Testament? Is he, when he says he is an Elohim, and that he is speaking to the divine council, which is the caste of Elohim, the other gods, those God among many gods, God of many gods, that when you start seeing that word used in Genesis 6, you've got Elohim, the Elohim, the name for God, the sons of Elohim, those who are of the God of many gods, the B'nai Ha-Elohim. Daniel, the book of Daniel, refers to them as the Watchers. The book of Enoch, which was taken out of canonized scripture and set aside in the apocryphal books because during the councils of Nicaea and others, the councils convoked by Constantine in the 300s, they couldn't decide whether or not it should be left in or left out. They couldn't come to a unanimous vote. So they pushed it aside and put it in these apocryphal books. And so it's still in some Bibles. I think you can find it in some of the Catholic Bibles, if I'm not mistaken. And so they also refer to the Elohim as the Watchers in the book of Enoch. So you've got the B'nai Ha-Elohim coming down and intermingling with the daughters of Adam, the Hebrew word for man or mankind or humanity. And so I asked my seminary professors, I said, why is there a contrast here? What does this mean? This sons of Elohim, the Elohim, part of the divine council, celestial beings, the bright shining princes of heaven. Who are these guys? And who are the daughters of Adam, the daughters of men, of mankind, human women? You've got this divine intermingling with humanity, finite with infinite, celestial with terrestrial. Is that what we're seeing here? And I reminded them, remember you said words mean things, so why is there a contrast? And they said, Scotty, move on. Don't worry about that. All that means is that the Elohim being spoken of, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of the Elohim, was referring to the human sons of the aristocrats who built the school of the prophets. And they're referring to them metaphorically as the sons of God here. And that they went down literally into the valley. They went down, slumming amongst the common women, and chose whichever ones they wanted, had kids with them, and so on, married them. And I said, that's interesting. Why doesn't it just say that in the text then? If that's what the text means, why doesn't it say that? I have pulled that text apart many, many times. I wish I could demonstrate it on the radio, but I can't. I would parse that text, and I would find that Elohim is always something that is synonymous with God. God of many gods. We're not talking about humans. The sons of God. The sons of the Elohim. The sons of Elohim. We're the God amongst gods, amongst many gods, the sons of gods amongst many gods. Also known as the Watchers. When you cross-reference, the Watchers were not human characters. The Watchers, there's a big part in Daniel, the book of Daniel, where the Watchers come to Daniel and make an appearance to him. Remember when, to Nebuchadnezzar, whom Daniel is prophesying to. And remember the king Nebuchadnezzar. He's stricken down, and it says in the biblical passage, for 7 years he lost his mind. And he was like a wild man, and they'd put him out in a pen, and he would eat the grass of the ground, and his hair and beard all grew long and shaggy. And after 7 years, it's lifted from him, and he sees the Watchers have come to him, and they've told him all about why this has happened and why they're releasing him from this. And he sits up and says, now I extol the name of the Lord Most High. And this is one of the kings of Babylon. And so what's interesting when you start seeing the sons of God coming down to the daughters of men, it's not speaking of humans mating with humans. It's speaking of celestial beings mating with humans. It says in the book of Enoch that they looked at them, they loved some of them, they took them to wife, and they loved them. We get people who want to give a picture of this being fallen angels, and that these fallen angels are what we're seeing here. Oh, this was the war in heaven. This was when Lucifer rebelled against God, and when Lucifer led a contingent of angels, and they all became the dark angels, the fallen ones that are on the earth, which is the demonic caste. Doesn't say any of that. Matter of fact, the name Lucifer doesn't even come up for another 1,000 years after this particular text in Genesis is written. It talks of Nakash, and we spoke of that the other night, the serpent in the garden. His name was Nakash, or that's what he is called, Nakash. And one of the descriptors of Nakash is that he is the illuminator, the bright, shining one. Then you cross-reference that with the Elohim in the book of Psalms. They were known as the bright, shining princes of heaven. And then you've got so many other passages that link the serpent in the garden, the serpent character, quote-unquote, Nakash, linked to the Elohim, that you start to see that, wait a minute, this passage isn't talking about anything other than celestial beings that have come down and have intermingled with humans and created offspring. And it says, as you go on with this, you find out that this passage in Genesis 6:1 is actually the preamble to the flood story, because it goes a few verses down, and Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, and you have the whole story of the account of Noah's flood. So these beings, it says at the same time there were also Nephilim on the earth in those days. I used to think that that meant the Nephilim were the direct offspring of the celestial Elohim mingling with the daughters of men, when indeed I don't think that's what it states at all. Although in other passages it hints at that again, how the Nephilim were the sons of the Elohim. Yet here it says they were on the earth in those days and also afterward. So when the Bible told us, let me correct that. I'm so used to saying that. When the Old Testament passage in Genesis says this, we have always interpreted it in churches and in synagogue as meaning the wickedness of man is what brought on the flood. That's what we were taught. The wickedness of mankind. And if you went to church as a kid, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. What caused the flood? The wickedness of man, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. God chose Noah because he was pure-blooded. He was pure, he was righteous. And yet, you go back to the passage, and it really seems to indicate that the wickedness that God is talking about that needs eradicating is not the wickedness of humans. It's the wickedness of the celestial mixing with human blood that has tainted the human bloodline. And God is going to wipe them all out. And the only family that he chooses is the family of Noah, who's a righteous man and who was pure in all his generations. A phrase standing for you could trace his lineage back to Adam, and he was pure-blooded. He was pure-blooded human. I've made great bones out of saying this in the past, that I had one critic tell me that I was obviously racist and bigoted because I was comparing Noah to being pure-blooded. Oh, that's racist language, white supremacist language. I said, no, I'm talking about pure-blooded as in what the biblical mythology states, which says he was pure-blooded in all his generations in opposition to all those who existed on the earth who were not pure-blooded, but were tainted by the celestial blood of the intermingling of the Elohim with humans. And this is just a start on how you can start digging a little deeper. I can say more about this. There's a lot more to say on this. And maybe we'll pick that up tomorrow night, because you know what? We're already at the end of our show. I've got, what have I got here? I got a minute left if I'm lucky. I got a minute and 12 seconds left right now. So I want to encourage you to go over to my site, intrepidradio.com. Check me out. You'll find links to my site, scottallenroberts.com. You can look at the ticker below and see more about where to find our stuff. You can find us all over at Odyssey Radio, ODYSY radio.com. And in about 1 hour, you can catch me live with Rocky Stucci on Rocky Stucci's Situation Room. I want to thank you all for being here. You don't know how much it means to me that you would take your time to spend it with me. And I encourage you to go out and take a look at things, dig deeper. Come on back tomorrow night. Go view us on the YouTube channel. You can watch that in archive too if you'd like. And that's it for tonight, folks. Thanks for being here. I will see you tomorrow night, same time, same place, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and 10 p.m. Eastern, 10 p.m. Eastern and 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. So for now, good night.
Hollow in soul, I see fire. Blood in the breeze, and I hope that you remember me. Oh, should my people fold, and surely I'll do the same. Confined in mountain holes, we got too close to the flame. Calling out, Father, oh, hold fast and we will watch the flames burn open on the mountainside. Desolation comes upon the sky, and I see fire inside the mountain. I see fire.